Welcome back to Homesteading with the Zimmermans, where we work hard and play hard on our little corner of land in Iowa. My husband and I were born and raised Old Order Mennonite, or horse and buggy Mennonite, as some refer to them as. And although we are no longer part of that culture or community, we are intentional about passing on the old-fashioned skills of our childhood to the next generation. Hi everybody! In today's video, we are going to be canning chicken and broth. Now, if you watched our chicken harvest video, you already know that we freeze very little of our chickens whole. We part them out. So what that means is we take out the chicken breasts and package them separately. We take out the legs and thighs and package them, and we collect all the wings and put them in a package. And then what we're left with is the back and the neck. And because we're not professionals at parting out the chickens, we often leave some extra meat on the bones just because we aren't very good at it. So then, after we have them all parted out, what we have left is what I call the carcass. And that we stuff all the carcasses in a bag. Let's see if I can get one of these. I can't get this off, but so we stuff all the carcasses in a bag and put them in the freezer. And so all the skin is on the back. And, you know, here you can see there's some meat here. Put them all in a bag, freeze them, and then on a later date, like today, I will get a couple of these bags of carcasses out, and that is what I use for our canned chicken and broth. So I got these out of the freezer about lunchtime, and I think we have 3 carcasses in each bag. So I'm going to fill my roaster with 6 chicken carcasses. And it's about 8:30 at night, and I'm going to turn it to about 200 degrees, and I'm just going to let it slow cook all night. Okay, so this is going to be a roaster that's very, okay, 1, 2, 3, I see 4 necks here, no wonder. So it looks like I have 7 carcasses in this. This is going to be one full roaster, but that's okay. I'm desperately trying to make room in our freezer because we've got hogs going to the locker. So my roaster is a good old-fashioned roaster, but it's missing one leg. That's why it's wobbly. So I'm going to turn this to 200. And the chicken is going to make a lot of its own juice, but I'm going to help it get started, and I'm going to add about 2 quarts of juice to get it started. And then before I go to bed, hopefully those will be defrosted enough that I can pull them apart and get them all down under the lid. Good morning, everybody. It is a brand new day. The kids are just off to school, and it's shortly after 8. And this chicken has been in my slow cooker at 200 degrees all night. Let me show you what it looks like. But it smells delicious in here. So you can see all that beautiful yellow broth on top. And if your chicken doesn't make this much broth after, you know. So last night when I got it started, I added about a quart of warm water to it to get it started. And then I was up shortly after midnight and I smelled the chicken. So I came out to check it, And then I added another 2 quarts of hot water because it wasn't making a lot of its own broth yet. So just kind of, you could add a whole gallon. I usually want the chicken at least half covered. But because my chicken was all frozen and sticking out, I couldn't really gauge how much water I was going to need. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove all the chicken carcasses. And we're going to let them cool on this tray. And at this point, your carcasses are probably going to be falling apart, but that's okay. I just tried to get them out the best that I can. Oh no! I just making a mess. I'll have that chicken for my breakfast. So I'm just going to let that broth simmer at 150 degrees, and I'm going to go set this in the laundry room and open the laundry room door because it's quite chilly outside this morning. And we're going to let this cool so that I can handle it and pick all the meat off of these carcasses. Okay, friends, this next part is going to freak some of you out. And what we're going to do now is make the broth that we had left over when we took our chicken from it. We're now going to turn that into a highly nutritious broth by adding chicken feet. So yes, many people are like, oh no, you know, where have those chicken feet all been? And you know, they're dirty, they walk through, you know, the chicken manure. But we're gonna scald them. So here's what we're going to do. And we cut these off of the chickens and throw them into the freezer, and then when I'm ready to make broth, I just put them into boiling water or simmering water for a little bit, and then I'll show you what happens next. And yes, some of the feet I don't want to keep because they're either too dirty or they have, you know, ammonia burns on the bottom like this. This is just an ammonia burn, and I'll just cut that part off. It's just from the bird not getting enough airflow and too much manure those last couple weeks. Anyway, so we have one bag that we keep for the dogs, and then I keep the nicest ones for us for broth making. And chicken feet have more collagen in than any other part of the bird. So if you scald them, you don't want to scald them too long because then all the meat comes off of the, see, it's just, you can scald all of that skin off and just pull it right off of the, but if you want to make good gelatinous broth, I highly recommend adding chicken feet. So see, there we go, nice and clean. We're going to let the nails on because as that simmers down, the collagen will be released from those nails as well. So many people will think that the spot on the bottom of the chicken foot is bumblefoot, but it would be very unusual for an 8-week-old chicken to have acquired bumblefoot. It's simply an ammonia burn. So then with that part that has an ammonia burn, I'm just going to cut that off. And there we go, a nice clean chicken foot. Many people, when they scald their chickens, you know, to remove the feathers, they make sure to scald the feet too, and then the feet, you know, the skin just peels right off. But we always use the feet as a handle when we are scalding our chickens, but I don't mind doing it later on like this. So the other thing is, if you didn't grow up being familiar with chicken feet like this, this is probably going to be a stretch for you. I, however, have very vivid memories watching my grandma on Chicken Harvest Day. She would skin the feet just like this, and she would put a little salt and pepper on them. So she'd go like this. She'd skin them, and then she'd sprinkle them with salt and pepper, and she ate the pads off of the chicken feet. So to me, using chicken feet isn't a huge deal. Like, I've known they were food my entire life. All right, now that we've got our chicken feet clean, we're going to add those to our broth. And we're just going to let this like at 150, 175, because the higher of a temperature you use, the more of the collagen you destroy, and also the darker your broth is going to get. Not that it matters what color your broth is, but slow and low is better than high and fast when it comes to broth. So now we are going to, all of those carcasses, I'm going to take the meat off, and then we're also going to add those bones and cartilage and anything else that is not meat. We're going to add that back to the broth, and we're just going to let it simmer all day. So I'm just going to gently start picking out the biggest chunks of meat and make sure there's no bones. And all the bones that I find are going to go back in the broth. And all the meat is going to go into this bowl. So the neck has a lot of nice fatty meat on it. I'm going to put all the skin back into the broth, and I'm going to bring you closer. So the neck has a lot of tiny little bones in it. So I just pull the meat off. I pull the meat off the best that I can. And then all these little bones are just going to go back into the broth. A lot of this is part of the breast meat that the children didn't remove when they parted the chickens out. And like I said, that's okay because we like to have canned chicken on hand anyway. So folks that are much more professional at, parting out their chickens are probably appalled at how much meat we left on each carcass. But like I said, we all work together to do it. And if there is family members that are saying, oh yeah, I'll part out chickens, I'm not going to stand over them and criticize them. When I know that I'll just can the meat that's left on the carcass. And the other reason that we are not real good at it is we do chicken harvest once a year. And by the time, so we don't have a lot of time to perfect our, our method. But I do know that by the time we're done parting out the, 70 to 100 chickens that we part out, we're much better than we are at the beginning. Then we're much better at the end of those 70 chickens than we were when we did the first couple. But then next year, when we do chicken harvest, we'll have to start all over. So nobody has a good opportunity to perfect their parting out of the chickens. And I tell the family that. I'm like, don't worry too much about being perfect with your parting out, because we'll just use that as canned meat. And then I will be doing a video this fall of all the ways that we use our canned meat. And that'll give you some ideas on where possibly you could use canned chicken. Don't worry too much about getting tiny little bones in there, because by the time they're pressure canned, they're so soft that you don't even know you're eating a bone when you bite on it. Especially if it's tiny bones. Now, bigger bones you probably would know, but the little tiny bones, sometimes I get a little neck bone in there or something. Well, I've made some good progress with getting all this meat off of the bones. This is definitely, getting all the meat off of the carcasses is the most time-consuming part of canning chicken. Okay, I'm happy with the amount of meat I've found, and all of this is skins and bones and cartilage, and we're going to put this back into our broth. And then we're also going to fill our slow cooker with more water, because we're now going to work on the broth. And if we didn't add more water, that would be a very, very concentrated broth, because I know I've got a lot of bones and cartilage and skin in there, so I know I can add a lot of water. Now, we're just going to let this simmer. And I have to go downstairs to my jar storage and pray that I can find enough jars to can this chicken and broth. I really am going to have to go purchase more jars this year because of my efforts to make room in our freezer. I've canned a lot more meat than I normally do. So I probably will have to go purchase more quart jars. Plus, I also did some canning for our daughters, for their houses, for their pantries. So that took up some of my jars, but that's okay. That's what it's all about. I can easily buy more jars if it means that they get some home canned food in their pantry. Okay, I've got 7 jars here, and I'm gonna fit this chicken into these 7 jars. Normally when I can meat, I like to, found a piece of skin there. I like to use wide mouth jars just because I can get my hand inside of a wide mouth jar and, you know, really make sure I get it clean. But beggars can't be choosers. All I could find down there was regular mouth. So I don't fill my jars of chicken really full because I know I'll fill it up with broth, and I know how much chicken I need to make a pot of soup or a casserole, and I don't need my jars stuffed full of chicken. You know what I did forget to show you was about putting a splash of vinegar into your broth, because it helps draw more minerals out of the bones. So I'm just gonna put a little splash in there. This is a 22 quart roaster, and I put probably a 3/4 cup of vinegar in. Okay, so I've got all my chicken in the jars. And now, so I used the 4 jars funnel. I could only think of the Pennsylvania Dutch word for this. And at home, in Pennsylvania Dutch, we called it an eye canna. Anyway, but the beautiful thing about the 4 jars funnels is it comes with this little strainer that goes on the inside. And you could take this chicken and just fill this with hot water, and you'd still have a nice broth in, you know, that would make its own broth when you pressure can it. But because I have plenty of broth, I'm going to add a couple cups of broth to each quart and then add hot water. And I'm gonna use that little strainer just because I've not yet strained my broth. So now I'm just gonna take some hot water, and we're going to fill the jars the rest of the way with hot water. So this is also optional. Sometimes I don't add salt and sometimes I do. You can add about a teaspoon of salt. And of course I'm using the Redmond's mineral salt, and you'll find the link for this salt in the description. So next, we're of course gonna wipe the rims from all the jars. Wipe all the rims. And I am, of course, using my favorite canning lids, the 4 jars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm gonna rinse these. So it is a beautiful day outside, and I'm excited to get this checked off the list so I can go work in the garden. So I know I say this sometimes. I think, well, I said this in another video I made, so I'm not going to say it this time. But then I forget that some of you may be new here and may not have watched some of my canning videos before. So because the product in my jar is hot, I want to start with hot water. You always want the same temperature water in your canner as you have product in your jar, or approximately the same. So I'm going to start with hot water, or at least very warm water, in the bottom of my pressure canner. And I'm going to cover the bottom 1 inch of the jars. And there we go. We got our meat in there. Our broth is simmering in the kitchen, And we're just gonna wait for the steam to come out of this vent. So once it's been steaming out, then you know that your water in the bottom is boiling. I usually let it steam out anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm gonna put my 15-pound weight on. And now I'm gonna have to watch that pressure gauge. And I want to slowly bring it up to 15 pounds. And here's another thing, if you watch my canning videos, you already heard me say this, but for those of you that have not heard it, when you're canning on a Camp Chef or any stove that has burns hotter, has more BTUs than your kitchen stove, you're gonna want to watch your burner carefully, because it'll cause your jars to break if the pressure comes up too fast, or if the jars cool down too fast after you turn it off. This is not really a problem when you're cooking on, a kitchen stove, but for something like this that burns hotter, you're gonna want to bring the pressure up a lot slow, or you're gonna want to turn your burner down and bring your pressure up slowly. And then when it's all done, you'll want to just slowly ease off on the pressure and bring your pressure back down slowly. And it's fairly breezy today, so I think I'm going to take this wind guard and I'm going to put it around the front, just to give my burner a little more protection from the wind, and trap more of the heat right there under my pressure canner. Okay, 45 minutes at 15 pounds of pressure was reached, and I turned my burner down slowly. And now I'm not going to open this or anything, because with the All-American it's not cast iron, but it's thicker. I can't think what it is. So it'll hold the heat for a long time, and that's what you want. So whenever I'm pressure canning something and I only need one, I'll always go for my All-American first, because I like how that one keeps the jars warm for a much longer time. They don't cool off nearly as fast as they do with the Presto, which has thinner walls. However, if you have a Presto, just be very conscious, be very intentional about backing off your heat slowly. So we're just going to leave this, and I'm going to go to the garden and pick tomatoes. So my broth has been simmering all afternoon. I ran some errands, donated some blood, and now we're going to cut some herbs, and we're going to add the herbs to the broth just for the last like 60 to 90 minutes, because herbs are so delicate. You don't want to simmer them all afternoon, or you'll lose the nutrition that you would get from them. So we're just going to cut them and put them in. They smell so good. I've got some thyme, some sage, and some parsley. This is my favorite part about making broth, because now it'll smell really good in here. So because I was gone this afternoon, I allowed this chicken in the pressure canner to cool all afternoon, but you could remove it as soon as the outside of the canner is no longer too hot to touch. So one of the reasons you want to cool your jars down slowly is because if you remove them too fast, the chances that it'll boil over and siphon out are much higher. And as you can see, even after 4 hours, the contents of these chicken jars are still hot enough to be simmering a little bit. So always remember to allow extra time for the jars and your product to cool down real slowly to prevent siphoning. So here, like, you can see this chicken foot is falling apart.
Where's Kendra?
So we know that all the goodness has come out of that chicken foot. So we are ready to can this broth. Mitch, are you gonna go milk now?
I have it.
To what? Oh yeah.
Are we gonna eat soon? Because
Yes, we're gonna eat real soon. Now what I need to do is I need to strain all the pieces out. And so I'm gonna use this strainer and I'm putting it into this 1 gallon pitcher because then I can easily pour it straight into the jars. Okay, we're gonna move into here because I know myself and I know I will make a mess. I'm gonna turn this off. So then the next thing I'll do, and see all that delicious broth, is I'll rinse down these scraps with very hot water to make sure I get all the goodness off of them. And then this will all just go to the pigs. Harrison, can you go get me a schlap bucket? So then we're just going to start filling jars with broth. My goal is to get 7 quarts so that I have 1 canner full. Okay, so I've got my 7 quart jars filled with hot broth, and I've got this much left over, so I'm gonna get it out of the plastic because it's hot and I don't want it setting in that plastic. And I'm just gonna let it cool down a bit. And then what we're going to do with this, with these 4 cups of broth, is we're going to put this in the freezer. I'll freeze these in ice cube trays for our grandson, and once it cools down a little bit, I will put it in freezer containers. And then this is more for nutritional purposes. This is like when we're sick or recovering from something, and because more of the nutrition is retained when you freeze it versus when you pressure can it. So this is for quick, easy cooking. It's still nutritious, but this is for like almost like medicinal purposes. Okay, Harrison, I need you to get me lids and rings.
how much?
I need 1, 2, 3, 4 regular mouth and 3 wide mouth. Yeah, it won't be long. Did you find them?
1, 2, 3.
I also need 1 more regular mouth.
Oh, boy. Now these cookies are ready.
Don't pick at them.
No, I was getting a greenie.
Oh.
I'll put these on for you.
Okay.
Hot.
Yeah, they're hot. That's why I have a rag.
You can like do these tighter.
One more.
Mine aren't very tight.
Okay.
Like this one add this one.
All right, here we go. Out into the canner. So then we're just going to can our broth for the same amount of time and pressure that we did the chicken. So 15 pounds of pressure for 45 minutes. Good morning. It is a brand new day and we've got our chicken broth. I've got a jar in there that broke. I'm not happy about that. Number one, because it makes all my other jars greasy. And I hate to waste a quart jar full of good broth. But I do expect these kinds of things when I get down to the last bits of my quart jars, because they're from the very back of the shelf and they're probably back there because I didn't like them. And I always like to take note. Every jar, just gonna say this, every jar that I've broken this canning season has been a ball jar. Every jar. So I have a lot of other brands of jars. I have a lot of Kerr. Woo! Kitty, you can't come up here. The kitty. You can't come up here. And then I have a bunch of these that don't have a label on, but they were labeled, they're the Anchor Hocking brand, and they were labeled for pressure canning, and they feel real thick and heavy, so I really like those. But yeah, the ball ones, out of all of my jars, the newer ball ones anyway, the ones that I've bought within the last 5 years are the most likely to break for me. So because I had one of my jars of broth break in the canner, I need to wash every jar with hot soapy water, because the outsides of all the jars are now greasy and I don't want mold to grow on them when they are in the cold room. So this is that broth that I set aside to cool, and it's not exactly cold yet, but it's already nice and gelatinous. It's already gelling up very nicely, even though it's not quite chilled yet. If I were to let this get exactly chilled, it would be like Jell-O. You could hold it in your hands. And that's mostly due to those chicken feet. That's how much collagen is in the chicken feet. So what we're going to do with this, we're going to fill our ice cube trays, and then these will be small portions for our grandson and for medicinal purposes, and then I'll freeze the rest in freezer boxes. And then when they're completely frozen, we'll just pop them out and put them into a freezer Ziploc and send them to our daughter's house for her freezer. Okay, so I've got these 4 pint boxes, and I inherited these from my grandma, and I get so happy every time I find lids with her handwriting on it. These say lima beans. She apparently did not know that you can't get permanent marker off of these lids, because I have some lids where she just put an X on this and wrote a new label on it. These, they don't have a brand on, but they're my favorite, and I'm gonna try and link the new ones like this, because I know the Mennonite stores now carry new freezer boxes just that are made like this. They're made by a different, they're American made, different manufacturer, but just like this. And they're my favorite. So I'm gonna try to find an online Mennonite store that has those. So I'm just gonna take some very hot water and rinse this out. Put it in a mug. I'm gonna add a little bit of mineral salt and a little bit of black pepper. And I am going to have myself a nutritious little snack. Yeah, that's good. That's very good. There we go. Well, friends, that brings us to the end of this week's video. Thank you so much for watching and commenting and sharing and liking our videos. We appreciate every one of you, and we will be back next week with another video.